ancient India, a land of rich culture, philosophy, and spirituality, but also a place where justice could be swift, brutal, and utterly terrifying. From an elephant execution to a law where the saying "an eye for an eye" is taken quite literally, these punishments are some we can be glad we have left in the past. In ancient India, using elephants to execute criminals wasn't just about punishment, it was a very dramatic display of the king's sheer power and the state's unchallengeable authority. These majestic beasts were trained to crush, dismember, or even torment offenders in front of an assembled crowd. Imagine an elephant, guided by its mahout, methodically stepping on or tearing apart the condemned. A horrifying sight. This method was not only effective in dispensing justice, but also served as a chilling deterrent to would-be criminals. The symbolism was potent. Just as an elephant could control and dominate with its size and strength, so too could the king govern his subjects. Historical records, like those from the Mughal era, detail how these executions were a public spectacle, emphasizing the gravity of the crime and the consequences of defying royal laws. In ancient India, the punishment of mutilation was not just about retribution, it was a lifelong billboard advertising one's crimes. Take, for instance, the fate of thieves. Caught with your hand in the proverbial cookie jar? Well, you might literally lose that hand. The logic was brutally simple. No hand, no more stealing. Adultery too had its unique markers. Noses were often the price of illicit love. This wasn't just a physical penalty, but a social one, visibly branding the adulterer and affecting their interactions in society. The idea was as much about prevention as it was punishment, serving as a warning to others about the costs of criminal behavior. Such punishments were designed to be as much as a deterrent to the community as they were retribution against the individual, ensuring that every glance in the mirror or sideways look from a neighbor reminded the wrongdoer and others of the steep price of transgression. Impalement in ancient India was as grim as it sounds, a truly chilling method of execution that we've seen come up a lot in history. A long, sharp stake is driven through the body of the condemned, usually from the bottom to the top. The exact trajectory could vary. Sometimes it was a slow and agonizing journey through vital organs, and other times, if placed just right, it was a mercifully quick exit. This wasn't just about punishing the criminal like a lot of these on this list, it was a public spectacle designed to instill fear and obedience among the populace. Historical records aren't flush with named examples from India, but like I mentioned, similar practices were noted around the ancient world, highlighting the widespread use of this absolutely brutal punishment. In ancient India, the choice of such a method emphasized the absolute power of rulers and the severe consequences of defying the law, serving as a warning that the stakes, quite literally, were high when it came to crime and punishment. Sorry, I couldn't help myself with that one. In ancient India, the concept of a fair trial took a rather fiery, watery, or gravity-defying turn with the use of ordeals meant to determine guilt or innocence. Think of it as the ultimate test of fate, where only the divine could decide your destiny. If you were accused of a crime, you might have to prove your innocence by literally playing with fire or taking a plunge in a water trial. For instance, the ordeal by fire could involve walking through flames or carrying a hot iron. If you emerged unscathed, you were deemed innocent, as it was believed that the gods had intervened to protect the truthful. Similarly, the water ordeal might see an accused thrown into a river. Floating meant innocence, while sinking, somewhat counterintuitively, suggested guilt. Another head-scratcher was the ordeal by balance, where you'd be weighed before and after the accusation. If you weighed less afterwards, the loss was seen as the weight of your guilt lifting. These methods were steeped in the belief that supernatural forces would not allow the innocent to suffer, a theory that definitely puts one's fate squarely in the hands of the gods. Wow. If supernatural forces didn't allow innocent people to suffer, the world would be very different. I'm just having a deep thought in the middle of filming this video. Okay, oh my god, I'm losing my mind. Speaking of losing my mind, the next one. Beheading was pretty much the go-to method for executing nobles and royals in ancient India. Sort of like the VIP treatment in the grim world of capital punishment. Seen as a somewhat honorable way to go, especially compared to some of the more brutal methods like being trampled by elephants or impaled. Beheading was quick and believed to be less painful. Historical texts sometimes recount the use of beheading for high-profile traitors or warriors who had fallen from grace. For instance, in some ancient tales, heroic figures captured in battle would be granted this less dishonorable death. It was not only about ending lives, but also about preserving some semblance of dignity in death, ensuring the elite met their end with a swift strike rather than prolonged suffering. In ancient India, branding wasn't just about marking livestock, it was also a stark punishment for criminals, leaving a permanent scar that spoke louder than words. Imagine having a hot iron pressed against your skin, not just searing the flesh, but also stamping a symbol of your crime for everyone to see. For instance, a thief might be branded with the image of a dog, a symbol that marked them as untrustworthy and sneaky. According to the Manu Smriti, a revered Hindu law book, branding was prescribed for various misdeeds, including theft and giving false testimony. This kind of punishment served multiple purposes. It was a painful penalty, a lifelong mark of shame, and a public declaration of one's misdeeds, all rolled into one fiery imprint. It was the ancient world's version of a criminal record that could never leave you behind. In ancient India, tossing someone off of a cliff wasn't just a dramatic way to say goodbye, it was a literal execution method for the worst offenders. Known as throwing from heights, this punishment involved hurling criminals from cliffs or the top of tall structures, and it was just as much about the spectacle as it was about the sentence. The gravity of the crime was matched by the gravity that they faced, quite literally. This method was symbolic too. It represented a cleansing of sorts, removing the unwanted elements from society by physically casting them out. While there aren't many specific historical figures tied to this fate, the method itself underscores the ancient judicial system's blend of harshness and theatrics. Banishment really packed a punch back in the day. Imagine being totally cut off from your family, your friends, and all of the familiar nooks of your neighborhood. That's kind of what banishment was about. It wasn't just a timeout, it was like being told you couldn't play in your own backyard ever again. And then there's exile, which was even more intense, especially if you dabbled in politics a bit too much. You'd have to pack up and leave the kingdom entirely. Think of Rama from the Hindu epic the Ramayana. This guy got hit with a 14-year exile from his own kingdom. That's a long time to be away from home, roaming forests and dealing with all sort of epic challenges. The method of boiling as an execution tool might sound like something straight out of a horror tale, but in ancient India it was a grim reality for those who committed particularly vile acts. A giant cauldron bubbling away with either oil or water at a scalding temperature, the condemned would then be unceremoniously tossed in, facing a gruesome and agonizing end. This extreme punishment was not doled out lightly, it was reserved for the worst of the worst crimes. Crimes so heinous that mere death wasn't punishment enough. Its inclusion in ancient legal codes suggests that it was a vivid, terrifying deterrent used to instill fear and ensure societal norms were not just followed, but revered. So, while the pot for boiling might have been less common compared to other methods, its very existence underlies the harsh justice system of ancient times, where the severity of the punishment matched the perceived immorality of the crime. That'd be so up. Imagine just watching someone boil. I don't know, that's just crazy. And people back in the day really just like gathered. They were like, oh yeah, Timothy's getting executed today, we all gotta go downtown. It's just so crazy. Alright. In ancient India, being sentenced to death by burning was another one of those punishments reserved for the most heinous of crimes. A fiery fate that was as dramatic as it is terrifying. Picture a public gathering, the air thick with anticipation and a little bit of fear, as the condemned is either tied to a stake or hurled into a gaping fire pit. It was a vivid public spectacle meant to sear the consequences of grave sins into the collective memory of the onlookers. Historical texts don't shy away from these grim tales, like the infamous instance of a queen accused of witchcraft, doomed to prove her innocence or perish in the flames. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you all again very soon, I'm sure. Goodbye. Crack. This is the first thing I say on crack. Alright, ancient Indian punishments. This was actually a really hard list, to be honest with you. It's not a lot of information out there. Alright, meant to determine guilt or innocent. What the with the use of ordeals, according to the Manusmriti. Yeah. That sounds good. Back in ancient India, tossing someone off of a cliff, that was like a hard switch up. That was maybe a little dark. Oh, that was it. I thought there was one more for some reason.